The story begins with a female protagonist transmigrated into the world of a novel. She is living quietly in a small cabin deep in the forest, believing she is nothing more than an insignificant extra with no role in the story. The story then flashes back to her previous life. She was an Olympic Taekwondo gold medalist whose only family was her younger brother, Yoon. While she was competing for her first Olympic gold medal, her brother passed away in the hospital. He deliberately made the authorities hide the news from her until after the competition because he wanted her to fulfill her dream. When she learned of his death, she was devastated and left completely alone. Almost crushed and starting to live as a loner, she saw a web novel ad in which the villain looks like her younger brother. She got obsessed with the web novel. Sometime later, she somehow awakens inside the body of Elia. Because Elia has amnesia, she remembers almost nothing about this world's past. Instead of trying to become important, she decides to live peacefully in a secluded forest cabin and avoid the novel's main storyline altogether. However, her peaceful life ends when she discovers a young boy alone in the forest. The child has silver hair and red eyes and looks almost identical to her deceased younger brother. Unable to leave him behind, she rescues him from a wolf and treats his injured hand. She suddenly realizes exactly who the boy she rescued is. His name is Calb, the child villain from the romance fantasy novel she had read in her previous life, when she couldn't help but call him Yoon, her brother. He politely thanks her for saving him and apologizes for not being the Yoon she had mistaken him for. Even his voice and mannerisms remind her painfully of her brother, making it difficult for her to keep her emotions under control. As they prepare to leave the forest, she tells Caleb to climb onto her back so she can carry him. At first, he refuses because he doesn't want to burden her, saying his injury isn't serious. His words are almost identical to something Yoon once said to her in their previous life, bringing back painful memories. Unable to hold back her feelings, she insists that she's strong enough and happily gives him a piggyback ride. Back at her cabin, she treats Caleb's injured hand and carefully thinks about what to do next. Although he resembles her brother, she reminds herself that Caleb is a completely different person. More importantly, she knows that in the original story, he grows up to become one of the world's most terrifying villains. She doesn't want an insignificant extra like herself to become entangled with the main plot. She finally makes a decision. She will simply look after Caleb until his hand heals, then send him safely back to his family. She was surprised to know that Caleb hasn't eaten anything since morning because his teacher has ordered him to skip meals just so he could fit in the royal dress. She got angry over the teacher, making a child go on a diet while he is still in a growing phase. Determined to feed him a lot of food, she entered the kitchen. Elia starts preparing dinner for Caleb. Unfortunately, the only ingredient she has in abundance is potatoes, so she serves him a table full of potato dishes: steamed potatoes, potato soup, potato pancakes, potato potage, and stir-fried potatoes. Embarrassed by the simple meal, she apologizes, but Caleb happily eats everything, clearly enjoying the warm, home-cooked food. Elia, meanwhile, decides that she needs to hunt the next day because she can't keep feeding him potatoes forever. The following morning, Caleb wakes up much later than usual and panics. Since witnessing his parents' murder as a child, he has suffered from severe insomnia and has never been able to sleep peacefully. For the first time in years, he slept through the entire night without nightmares, leaving him both refreshed and confused. Watching Elia prepare freshly caught meat and fish, Caleb becomes curious about her. However, instead of asking about her past, he requests that she wake him up early from now on because, as the Grand Duke's heir, he believes he must never oversleep. Elia dismisses the idea. She tells him that while he's staying in her cabin, he doesn't have to worry about noble responsibilities. To her, he isn't the grand young lord, he's simply Caleb, a little boy who should sleep when he's tired, eat when he's hungry, and play when he wants. Caleb insists that he is no longer a child, but Elia laughs, ruffles his hair, and reminds him that no one in the forest is going to judge him. Unlike the strict tutors at the Grand Duke's estate, she encourages him to enjoy a carefree childhood. Her words leave a deep impression on Caleb. For years, he has lived under constant pressure to behave like the perfect heir, but Elia is the first person to treat him simply as a child. As he quietly smiles to himself, he realizes that the warmth in her home is beginning to melt the loneliness he has carried for so long. Caleb then begins talking about the person he admires most, Cedric Kettisel Indigentia. Cedric was adopted by the Duke's family at the age of 10. By 13, he had already mastered gravity magic, and at 18, he successfully revived the long-lost weather magic. His strength was so overwhelming that he even broke the Emperor's staff, earning the title of the strongest person in the Empire. Although they are not related by blood, Caleb deeply loves and respects his older brother. Caleb then reveals that Cedric is suffering from a powerful fairy's curse. According to him, only the fairy who cast the curse can lift it, but despite years of searching, no one has ever found the culprit. Hearing this, Elia immediately remembers the original novel. She knows this curse is the very event that eventually drives Caleb to become the story's greatest villain. Caleb goes on to mention the legendary Sanctuary of Knowledge, a place hidden within the Imperial Palace that is said to contain all the knowledge in the world. His family believes that if someone can enter the sanctuary, they may finally discover a way to save Cedric. However, only authorized people are allowed inside. Access is limited to members of the imperial bloodline or those who have sworn allegiance to the royal family. The fastest way for Cedric to gain entry is to become the Grand Duke and pledge his loyalty to the imperial family, but Cedric refuses to inherit the duchy. Instead, he keeps trying to make Caleb the next Grand Duke. Caleb worries that they may never be able to break the curse. Elia looks at him with saddened eyes. She already knows what the future holds. The day Caleb becomes Grand Duke, Cedric's condition will rapidly deteriorate. Caleb will rush to the Sanctuary of Knowledge and search desperately for a way to save his brother, but he won't find even a single clue about the fairy. She remembers that the fairy responsible will appear again in the future, only to be captured alive by the imperial family. The moment Caleb hears the news, he will race to the dungeon where the fairy is being held. But by the time he arrives, she will already be dead. Believing there was a conspiracy within the imperial family, Caleb will come to distrust and deeply hate them. Driven by revenge, he will eventually turn to dark magic and form a contract with the devil. Returning to the present, Elia silently realizes just how tragic Caleb's future truly is. Although she still intends to stay out of the original story, she now understands that the child sitting before her is carrying a burden far heavier than anyone his age should bear. A week passes and Caleb's cold demeanor begins to change noticeably. The stiffness in his expression fades and he becomes much more relaxed. He even starts expressing his emotions openly. Pleased with his progress, Elia suddenly realizes that an entire week has already passed. Considering how desperately Cedric cares about Caleb, she finds it strange that he still hasn't come to take him home. At the Grand Duke's castle, Cedric's desperation over Caleb's disappearance has thrown the entire estate into chaos. Unable to find his younger brother after 10 days, Cedric unconsciously unleashes his overwhelming weather magic, covering the castle in a violent snowstorm despite it being spring. His aide, Edwin, desperately begs him to stop before the crops fail and the castle becomes completely isolated, but Cedric refuses until Caleb is found. He says, "I'll ensure that crops won't fail, but you all have to live in cold until Caleb is found, so everyone must try their hardest to find my brother." Even after the Eternal Guides and Informational Guild, no trace of Caleb was found. Cedric even wondered about taking the help of the Dark Guild. At the Elias, she notices that Caleb's injured hand has almost completely healed. Believing he'll soon return to the Grand Duke's estate, she decides to make the most of the little time they have left together. She continues treating him like an ordinary child, encouraging him to rest, eat well, and enjoy life instead of worrying about his duties as the heir. Sleeping next to Elia, Caleb thinks of his conversation with Cedric. Cedric had firmly told him that he would never become the Grand Duke. Instead, he wanted Caleb to inherit the title and lead the Indigentia family. Confused, Caleb said it would take time for me to be Grand Duke, and then he would have to break the curse as soon as possible. Cedric explained there was another path and told Caleb not to worry about the curse or the Sanctuary of Knowledge. Sometime later, while walking through the mansion, Caleb accidentally overhears two maids talking. They mention that Master Cedric is getting married. Startled, Caleb hides nearby and quietly listens to their conversation. The maids explain that Cedric's sudden marriage is directly related to the fairy's curse. Since he gave up his right to inherit the duchy, marrying into the imperial family has become his only remaining way to gain access to the Sanctuary of Knowledge. The maids even speculate that the curse might be contagious, wondering who in their right mind would willingly marry someone carrying such a terrifying curse. As Caleb listens, he realizes that this is nothing more than rumors, but he is upset that his brother doesn't share such things with him. Then Elia suddenly comes to mind. For a brief moment, Caleb finds himself wondering if someone as kind as Elia could become Cedric's wife. If Cedric married Elia, he would be able to prove his loyalty to the imperial family as a married man and finally gain permission to enter the Sanctuary of Knowledge. Once inside, Cedric might discover a way to break the fairy's curse. After the curse was lifted, Cedric could even divorce Elia if that was what they both wanted. Caleb then imagines himself openly supporting Elia. The three of them could live together in the Grand Duchy, and the lonely mansion that had always felt so empty would finally become a warm home filled with laughter. But the fantasy doesn't last long. Caleb suddenly snaps back to reality. He realizes he has been deciding Elia's future entirely on his own, without ever considering what she might want. Ashamed of himself, he wonders how he could have such selfish thoughts. He quietly blames himself, believing that this selfishness is exactly why he has always ended up alone. The next day, Elia cheerfully greets Caleb with a bright smile, but Caleb looks unusually gloomy, as though something is weighing heavily on his mind. Elia watches him from the kitchen and thinks, he's been like this since this morning. Wanting to cheer him up, she gently calls his name. Hey, Caleb. When he looks at her, she smiles warmly and asks, could you please pick some lemons from outside? Caleb obediently nods. Yes, I understand. Even as he walks away, his slow, heavy footsteps make it obvious that something is still troubling him. Elia watches him leave and worries that staying indoors is only making him feel worse. She decides that after he finishes, the two of them should go for a walk together to get some fresh air. However, just as Caleb heads outside, Elia suddenly notices a mysterious hooded figure standing near him. He immediately reaches for Caleb. Thinking the stranger is an enemy, Elia instinctively grabs a frying pan and swings it with all her strength, knocking him to the floor in a single hit. To her horror, Caleb rushes toward the unconscious man, crying, brother, brother Cedric. Elia freezes as she realizes she has just knocked out Cedric Indigentia, the legendary Grand Duke and Caleb's older brother, the very man whose curse eventually causes Caleb to become the novel's villain. Panicking, she and Caleb carry the unconscious Cedric onto the bed. While Caleb fetches water and towels, Elia loosens Cedric's robe so he can breathe more comfortably. Before she can finish, Cedric suddenly grabs her wrist and opens his eyes. He coldly calls her a pervert, leaving Elia completely speechless. Before she can explain herself, Cedric asks what her motive is. Confused, Elia asks what he means, only for Cedric to calmly accuse her of kidnapping Caleb. The absurd accusation shocks Elia, who can only stammer in disbelief. He also accuses Elia of using magic to hide the cabin from anyone searching for him. Afraid that the situation will only get worse, she immediately offers to bring Caleb over so he can explain everything himself. The moment she turns to leave, Cedric stops her. Using gravity magic, he pins Elia in place before she can take another step. Startled, Elia freezes as the overwhelming pressure makes it impossible for her to move. Cedric calmly asks where she thinks she's going, making it clear that he has no intention of letting a suspected kidnapper out of his sight. The oppressive aura surrounding him only grows stronger, making Elia realize why he is known as the strongest mage in the Empire. Just as the situation reaches its breaking point, Caleb rushes into the room and stands protectively in front of Elia. He angrily orders Cedric to release his magic and apologize, then firmly declares that Elia is his savior, leaving Cedric stunned and forcing him to reconsider everything he had assumed. Caleb stands up to Cedric and reveals that Elia actually saved his life after he was chased by a wolf. Hurt by Cedric's actions, he says he's disappointed that his own brother would accuse his savior of being a kidnapper. Although Cedric remains calm, it's clear that Caleb's words have caught him off guard. Still suspicious, Cedric questions why Caleb didn't return home immediately if Elia hadn't threatened him, and points out that Caleb should have been able to teleport back using magic. Realizing the truth, Caleb finally admits that he pretended he couldn't return because he simply wanted to stay with Elia a little longer. Overcome with guilt, he apologizes to Elia for deceiving her, leaving both her and Cedric stunned by his confession. After confessing that he stayed with Elia on purpose, Caleb tearfully apologizes, convinced she'll be angry for deceiving her. Instead, Elia warmly hugs him and tells him he has nothing to apologize for. Her kindness overwhelms Caleb. Caleb then asks whether Elia will be sad when they part ways. When she honestly says she'll miss him, he gathers his courage and invites her to return to the Grand Duke's palace with him. Before she can respond, he surprises her with an even more unexpected request, asking if she would marry his brother, Cedric, leaving Elia completely speechless. Before she can respond, the story skips to the next morning, where she finds Caleb peacefully sleeping and decides not to wake him. As she prepares breakfast, Elia reflects on how chaotic the past few days have been and decides to make something for Cedric first. Carrying two mugs back to the room, Elia suddenly comes face to face with Cedric, who has already changed out of his wet clothes and is standing shirtless. Completely caught off guard, she panics and blurts out that he seems far too comfortable taking his clothes off, while Cedric simply looks at her in confusion, not understanding why she's so flustered. Just then, Cedric surprises her by sincerely apologizing for falsely accusing her of kidnapping Caleb. Although Elia insists he doesn't need to apologize because she was the one who hit him with a frying pan, Cedric calmly explains that she was only protecting Caleb. After convincing Cedric to put on a robe, the two sit down to talk over tea. As Elia observes him, she realizes that despite his cold and intimidating appearance, he's actually a kind and honorable person who isn't afraid to admit when he's wrong. The thought of Caleb's earlier request for her to marry Cedric suddenly resurfaces, leaving her flustered all over again. Cedric explains that Caleb asked Elia to marry him because he believes it's the only way to save his brother. Since the key to breaking the fairy's curse is hidden inside the Sanctuary of Knowledge, Cedric needs permission to enter it. However, because he isn't related to the Grand Duke's family by blood, he can't perform the royal ceremony required to gain access, unless he gets married. That's why Caleb thought marrying Elia to Cedric would solve everything. Elia admits the situation is far more complicated than Caleb realizes. Cedric then reveals that this is the first time he's ever seen Caleb trust someone so deeply. When Elia jokingly asks why Cedric doesn't simply find another bride, he quietly explains that rumors claiming his fairy's curse is contagious have spread across the empire, leaving her stunned. Elia asks Cedric why he's so determined to make Caleb the next Grand Duke instead of inheriting the title himself. She explains that she's worried about Caleb and wants to understand what's really going through his mind. Realizing her concern is genuine, Cedric decides to reveal the painful truth behind Caleb's past. Caleb was kidnapped as an infant and remained missing for 4 years, until the family finally located him at a distant orphanage. However, while bringing him home, their group was ambushed, and the entire family except Caleb was killed. Hearing this, Elia suddenly remembers the infamous Indigentia assassination case from the original novel and realizes just how tragic Caleb's childhood truly was. Cedric explains that he can no longer reclaim the Grand Duke's title, so he wants Caleb to become the next Grand Duke and grow strong enough to protect himself. Although Elia understands his intentions, she believes true strength comes from helping Caleb become independent rather than forcing responsibility onto him. She also suggests that there may be other ways to save Cedric besides entering the Sanctuary of Knowledge. As Elia reflects on the original novel, she realizes Caleb's plan would never work. Even if she married Cedric and he gained access to the Sanctuary, the fairy's curse still couldn't be broken. She remembers that the only way to save him is to find the fairy who cast the curse. Lost in thought, Elia is finally brought back to reality when Cedric gently calls her name. Elia suddenly remembers that the fairy who cursed Cedric was eventually captured by the imperial family, but died before anyone could learn how to break the curse. Realizing they can't wait for history to repeat itself, she thinks of a new plan: to find the fairy before the imperial family does. Since she remembers seeing the fairy's face and name in the original novel, she believes they still have a chance to save Cedric. Excited by her discovery, Elia tells Cedric that she's found another way to break his curse, one that doesn't require him to get married. But as she recalls those details, Elia suddenly freezes. She realizes the horrifying truth: she herself is the fairy who cursed Cedric in the original story. Because she transmigrated with amnesia, she never remembered her identity until now. Overwhelmed by the revelation, she nearly collapses in shock. Curious, Cedric asks what the other way is. After gathering her courage, Elia suddenly blurts out, "You should marry me." The unexpected proposal leaves even her flustered. Cedric freezes in complete shock, unable to process what he just heard. Realizing how impulsively she confessed, Elia awkwardly buries her face in embarrassment. Trying to regain her composure, she thinks to herself, since she is the source of the curse, she has to recover her lost memories and find a way to break it before anyone discovers her true identity. She briefly considers running away from everything, but that thought quickly falls apart. What if after Cedric's death, Caleb one day discovers that she is the mysterious fairy from his past? The thought sends a chill down her spine. In her mind, she imagines Caleb confronting her, accusing her of deceiving him. He says she had plenty of time to break the curse before condemning her for tricking them all. Another horrifying possibility crosses her head: the original novel ending where she is thrown into the imperial family's dungeon only to die from an unknown cause. Maybe it would be a deadly illness, or perhaps someone who hated her enough would simply kill her. The more she thinks about it, the more hopeless everything seems. She realizes that running away won't save her because no matter where she goes, death could still be waiting. After calming herself down, Elia finally reaches a decision. She realizes there's only one way to survive. She has to marry Cedric, stay by his side, keep watch over the curse, and somehow recover her lost memories so she can break it herself. Once the curse is lifted, she plans to quietly leave and live the rest of her life somewhere no one can find her. She believes that if she can accomplish that, Cedric and Caleb will both be able to live happily. Her thoughts return to the present. Looking at Cedric and Caleb, Elia reflects that she originally tried not to get involved with them at all. But now that she knows she is the mysterious fairy, she can no longer walk away. To her, this world is no longer just the story from a book, it has become her reality. Caleb excitedly asks whether Elia has really decided to marry Cedric. Although she awkwardly agrees and says she'll become his sister-in-law and accompany them to the imperial palace, her real intention is to save Cedric. Cedric proposes a contract marriage, explaining that it will only last until his fairy's curse is broken. Once that happens, they will divorce, allowing Elia to return to her old life. Caleb then comes up with an unexpected solution. He suggests that even after the divorce, Elia can stay at the Grand Duke's palace by becoming his official ward. His thoughtful plan leaves Elia speechless. While Cedric notices that Caleb has changed, he's smiling more genuinely than ever before. Observing Elia's hesitation, Cedric suggests they continue the conversation elsewhere and reminds that they still need to work out the details of their contract marriage. Elia reflects on her decision and convinces herself that staying by Caleb's side is the best way to protect his future. Even though the tragedies happened before she arrived in this world, she can't shake the feeling of responsibility. At the same time, she reminds herself that she is no longer just a reader of the story. She is Elia, living this life herself. Worried that growing closer to Caleb will only make their eventual separation more painful, Elia resolves not to become emotionally attached to him. She pushes aside thoughts of the future and decides to focus on the challenges directly ahead. With that determination, she arrives with Cedric and Caleb at the Grand Duke's palace, marking the beginning of her new life there. She is amazed by its breathtaking luxury. However, her excitement quickly turns into nervousness as she realizes she knows nothing about noble life or how to behave in such a prestigious household. Cedric tells Elia he has to attend a vassal meeting and offers to have a maid escort her to her room while he's away. Just as he's about to leave, Caleb unexpectedly stops him and asks to attend the meeting as well, leaving both Cedric and Elia surprised. Elia immediately realizes this wasn't supposed to happen. In the original story, Caleb never attended a vassal meeting. As Caleb reflects on how Elia once saved and cared for him in the forest, he quietly resolves that he can no longer remain the same person he once was. As Cedric and Caleb leave for the vassal meeting, Cedric wonders how Elia managed to give Caleb this much courage. Soon after, a maid named Olivia introduces herself as Elia's personal attendant. The two exchange greetings, and after settling in, Elia asks whether the vassal meeting has already begun. Olivia confirms that it started not long ago. During the vassal meeting, Marquis Reynald strongly objects to Cedric's decision to marry Elia, questioning her worthiness. Cedric immediately shuts him down, declaring that Elia is the woman he loves and making it clear that the meeting is only to announce his decision, not to seek anyone's approval. Although the nobles are unhappy, remembering how terrifying Cedric became when Caleb once disappeared, the nobles are too afraid to oppose him openly, though some secretly suggest eliminating Elia instead. Only Marquis Reynald secretly resents the decision, realizing Cedric's sudden marriage threatens his own plans. Marquis Reynald Babylon is a powerful vassal who secretly orchestrated many of the tragedies in the original story. He is the only older brother of the previous Grand Duchess who was assassinated. He is like an uncle to Cedric and Caleb. When he failed to become the second most powerful person in the Grand Duchy after his sister's assassination, he began plotting for his own ambitions instead. To stop Cedric from marrying, Reynald spreads the false rumor that Cedric's curse can be transferred to anyone who stays close to him. As people begin avoiding Cedric, Reynald plans to falsely accuse Caleb and manipulate public opinion through the nobles beneath him. His schemes are made even easier because his daughter, Gerald, is Caleb's etiquette teacher. In the future, Cedric's curse eventually grows worse until he falls into an eternal sleep. Reynald then uses that opportunity to convince Cedric to marry his own daughter, claiming it is the only way to break the curse and secure his own influence over the Grand Duchy. But everything has changed. Reynald realizes that Elia's sudden appearance has completely ruined the future he was counting on. He can't understand why she would willingly stay by Cedric's side despite the rumored curse, and he grows increasingly anxious that his plans are falling apart. Seeing that Elia hasn't yet adapted to noble society, Cedric suggests that she attend etiquette lessons with Caleb until the wedding. The proposal immediately enrages Reynald, who protests that his daughter Gerald didn't graduate from a prestigious academy just to teach a lowlife. Hearing Elia being called a lowlife, Caleb's expression immediately turns cold. He quietly repeats the insult before shifting his gaze to Reynald, leaving the once confident noble visibly shaken as the atmosphere in the meeting hall turns tense. The next morning, Elia wakes up in her luxurious room and is surprised to find herself looking even more beautiful than before. As she admires her flawless appearance, her personal maid arrives and serves her an extravagant breakfast, reminding Elia just how different life at the Grand Duke's palace is from her days in the forest. After breakfast, the maid tells Elia that Cedric is waiting to meet her. When the maid asks how she'd like to dress and style her hair, Elia casually says that anything is fine and that she can get ready by herself. The maid is horrified by the idea and excitedly insists on preparing Elia properly, reminding her that she's about to meet her future husband. Elia visits Cedric's office and apologizes for making him wait. Cedric asks whether she slept well, and Elia happily admits that the bed was so comfortable she even rolled around in her sleep. Pleased to hear that she has settled in, Cedric asks her to wait while he finishes his paperwork. As Elia quietly waits, Cedric finally looks up and is left speechless. Seeing her dressed in the elegant outfit prepared by her maid, he can't hide his surprise at how beautiful she looks. Confused by his reaction, Elia simply asks if something is wrong. Elia is introduced to Edwin Polinoa, Cedric's chief aide, who warmly welcomes her to the Grand Duke's palace. Just as Edwin begins explaining why he came to see her, Cedric suddenly interrupts and insists that he will speak to Elia himself, sending Edwin away. After they are alone, Cedric casts a soundproof barrier so no one can overhear their conversation. He then gets straight to the point and asks Elia whether she has recovered any of her lost memories. Actually, Elia has already told everyone that she lost her memories. Cedric reminds Elia that they agreed to keep her memory loss a secret from everyone in the palace. He then presents a detailed contract marriage agreement that he drafted in a single day. The contract is set to last for 3 years, but if his fairy's curse isn't broken by then, it will automatically be extended. Cedric also tells Elia that she will receive 3 billion gold every month and can ask for even more money whenever she needs it. Completely overwhelmed by the enormous amount, Elia stares at the contract in disbelief before blurting out, 3 billion? As Elia reads the marriage contract, she realizes that the terms are overwhelmingly favorable to her and can't understand why Cedric would offer such generous conditions. Cedric explains that the money is compensation for the restrictions she will face after becoming his wife. He tells her that she won't be allowed to leave the palace unless she's accompanied by either him or Calb, but quickly clarifies that the rule exists solely for her protection. He even promises to assign knights as her personal escorts. Hearing Cedric speak so seriously, Elia starts worrying that he'll be watching her every move. After reviewing the marriage contract, Elia accepts the restriction on her freedom without hesitation. She explains that since she has lost her memories and can't prove who she really is, it's only natural for Cedric to be cautious, and she wants to earn his trust rather than object to the conditions. Since she's already used to people watching her in her previous life as an Olympic medalist, being escorted and monitored doesn't bother her. Seeing how calmly and sincerely she accepts everything, Cedric quietly acknowledges her response. As Elia reviews the contract, she realizes that Cedric has already covered almost everything. She even imagines using the promised reward after his curse is broken to buy a small house and live a peaceful life on her own. Remembering the happy days she spent with Caleb in the forest, Elia asks to add one final condition to the contract. Even after their contract marriage ends in divorce, she wants permission to visit the Grand Duke's palace from time to time just to see Caleb. Hearing that her only request is about his younger brother, Cedric is left completely speechless. Cedric agrees to consider Elia's request and says he'll first ask Caleb for his opinion before adding it to the marriage contract. Delighted, Elia sincerely thanks him, and Cedric promises to arrange a meeting with Caleb later. After leaving, Elia realizes her original plan was simply to complete the contract, take the reward, and live alone. But without realizing it, she has grown too attached to Caleb, to the point that her only request was to keep seeing him even after the marriage ends. Lost in thought, she doesn't notice she's clenching her fists until a worried maid asks if something is wrong. After Elia leaves, Cedric quietly reflects on how willingly she accepted every condition in the marriage contract. Just then, his aide Edwin excitedly gushes about Elia's beauty, especially her sparkling eyes, and wonders if she might possess the legendary jewel eyes, a rare trait associated with fairies. Cedric dismisses the idea, saying she's more likely to have mixed fairy blood than be a pure-blooded fairy. Edwin continues praising Elia's eyes, hair, and gentle voice without realizing Cedric's expression is slowly darkening. Although Cedric insists he isn't thinking about anything, Edwin quickly senses the awkward atmosphere and stops talking, while the scene subtly hints that Cedric may be jealous of all the attention Elia is receiving. Cedric reflects on Elia and realizes that although he knows nothing about her true identity, he believes she is a genuinely kind and sincere person unlike anyone he has met before. Thinking about her innocent smile, he unconsciously smiles to himself for the first time in a long while. Edwin is stunned when he notices the rare smile and excitedly teases him, saying he can't even remember the last time he saw him smile. Embarrassed, Cedric immediately tells him to be quiet before heading off to his lunch appointment with Caleb, leaving the mountain of paperwork behind for Edwin to organize as a punishment. During lunch, Cedric tells Caleb that Elia's only request for the marriage contract is to keep visiting the Grand Duke's palace after their divorce, so she can continue seeing him. Overjoyed, Caleb begins believing that if he tries harder, Elia might choose to stay by his side even after the contract ends, and he happily agrees to her request. With the matter settled, Cedric changes the subject and asks whether Caleb's etiquette lessons resume the next day. When Caleb says yes, Cedric announces that Elia will be attending those lessons with him from now on. After learning that Elia will be joining his etiquette lessons, Caleb resolves to work even harder so he can impress her. However, Cedric becomes confused when Caleb doesn't seem nearly as happy about the news as he expected, leaving Cedric to wonder why his brother is hiding his true feelings. Meanwhile, Elia heads out for a walk around the Grand Duke's estate. Admiring the beautiful flowers and clear sky, she happily remarks on how wonderful the weather is and enjoys the peaceful stroll through the palace grounds. While walking through the Grand Duke's estate, she overhears a group of maids talking about Cedric and Caleb. The maids mention that the brothers only talked about Elia briefly before eating in awkward silence, commenting that their relationship always seems uncomfortable despite being siblings. Hearing this, Elia is left confused because, in the original story, Cedric and Caleb were supposed to be very close brothers. After overhearing the maids, Elia realizes she may have misunderstood Cedric and Caleb's relationship. Wondering if there's something she still doesn't know about the brothers, she continues walking through the palace gardens. Soon, Caleb runs over to greet her. When Caleb asks if she's adjusting to life in the palace, she reassures him that Olivia has been taking good care of her. She then asks about his lunch with Cedric, and Caleb happily replies that it was nice, leaving Elia relieved that the brothers seem to have enjoyed their meal together. Elia and Caleb spend a relaxing afternoon together in the palace gardens before sitting beside a fountain. Caleb happily tells her that he's enjoying life in the palace because she's always by his side. He then admits that he was anxious about their upcoming etiquette lessons, fearing that once Elia saw his childish and immature side, she would end up hating him. Promising to do his best, Caleb sincerely tells her that he likes her and doesn't want to disappoint her. His unexpected confession leaves Elia completely speechless. While talking with Caleb, Elia notices the scars on his hands and asks if they were caused by punishment. She wonders whether he had been hiding them with gloves or if someone forced him to keep them a secret. Caleb explains that no one threatened him. He hid the scars because he believed people would be disappointed if they saw them. As he recalls being repeatedly told that failure deserved punishment and that his wounds should remain hidden, Elia realizes just how deeply those cruel words have shaped his self-worth. After seeing the scars on Caleb's hands, Elia remembers that his etiquette teacher is Gerald Babylon, the daughter of Reynold Babylon. She recalls that Reynold once tried to marry Gerald to Cedric while he was weakened by the curse, but Cedric rejected the proposal, making Elia realize Reynold's true motives. Suspecting there may be a connection between Gerald and Caleb's suffering, Elia asks if he ever told Cedric about his etiquette lessons. Caleb quietly admits that he never did because he was afraid Cedric would be disappointed in him. Elia finally realizes the truth behind the brothers' strained relationship. Reynold and Gerald deliberately manipulated Caleb, convincing him that Cedric disliked him. Believing the lie, Caleb kept his distance, while Cedric mistook that distance as rejection and gave his younger brother more space, allowing the misunderstanding between them to grow even deeper. As Elia pieces everything together, she realizes Cedric had always put Caleb before himself, even giving up the easiest chance to break his curse for his brother's sake. She also understands that Gerald and Reynold's manipulation has left Caleb unable to recognize how abnormal his treatment really was. Overcome with guilt, Elia takes Caleb's hands and admits she should have realized the truth much earlier, back when she first met him in the forest. Looking him in the eyes, she firmly tells him that the punishments he endured were not a normal way of teaching. Elia gently tells him that just because a teacher says something is for his future doesn't make it right. Instead of asking what he thought, she asks him a question no one ever had before. How did you feel? After a long silence, Caleb admits that he felt sad and often wondered if the way he was being treated was really right. He reveals that he wanted to ask Cedric for help, but never had the courage because he didn't know who he could trust. Caleb admits that he no longer knows what to believe. Although he wants to trust Elia because he likes her so much, years of manipulation leave him doubting himself and wondering if he's simply too stupid to understand the truth. Elia gently cups his face and tells him to stop doubting himself. She urges him to trust his own feelings instead of blindly believing others, reassuring him that everything will be okay. After Caleb finally calms down and agrees, Elia leaves his room. Once she's alone, her sadness turns into anger as she furiously blames Gerald and Reynold for everything they put Caleb through. Elia runs into Cedric in the palace corridor. He asks whether she had been out walking with Caleb and then casually asks how the outing went. Before answering, Elia remembers Caleb asking her to keep their conversation a secret because he wants to tell Cedric himself when he's ready, even though he's still afraid. Wanting to honor that promise, she hides the truth and awkwardly replies that the walk was fun, I guess, leaving Cedric slightly confused by her hesitant response. After thinking everything through, Elia realizes that her top priority is to separate Caleb from Gerald's influence before any more harm is done. However, she knows it won't be easy because Gerald is the daughter of Reynold, the Grand Duke's most powerful vassal, and dismissing her could create major problems within the estate. Even so, Elia makes up her mind. Determined to protect Caleb, she resolves to remove Gerald from her position as his etiquette teacher, no matter what it takes. After thinking about Caleb all night, Elia comes up with a new strategy, makes Cedric discover Gerald's incompetence. She decides to point out every strange mistake Gerald makes during Caleb's lessons until Cedric begins questioning her abilities. Once he loses confidence in Gerald, Elia believes he'll replace her with a new etiquette teacher, allowing Caleb to escape Gerald's influence. The next morning, Elia begins putting her plan into motion. After seeing that Caleb seems happier and has slept well, she promises herself that as long as she's by his side, Gerald will never be able to mistreat him again. Soon, a servant announces Gerald Babylon's arrival. Knowing this is the moment she's been waiting for, Elia steadies herself and orders the servant to let Gerald in. As Gerald enters and politely greets her, the long-awaited confrontation between them finally begins. Gerald greets Elia warmly and surprises her by acting kind and complimentary, even praising her beautiful voice. She then begins the etiquette lesson by having Caleb answer questions while asking Elia to demonstrate her normal walking posture. After watching Elia walk, Gerald immediately praises her, saying her posture is already beautiful and only needs a few minor improvements. Instead of relaxing, Elia becomes even more suspicious, realizing Gerald's pleasant behavior doesn't match what Caleb experienced and sensing that she's hiding something behind her smile. During the etiquette lesson, Gerald suddenly begins criticizing Elia, claiming that she learns much more slowly than other nobles. She repeatedly warns that if Elia doesn't improve, Cedric will be disappointed in her. As Gerald keeps insisting that Elia must prove she's worthy of becoming Cedric's wife, and repeatedly tells her to trust everything she says because it's for her future, Elia realizes what she's doing. Instead of openly abusing her students, Gerald manipulates them with gentle words, tying their self-worth to Cedric's approval, the same tactic she used on Caleb. Gerald recalls she refused to teach a low birth like Elia, but her father insisted she had no choice, reminding her that Cedric's words are still the law in Grand Ducal. During the family discussion, Gerald's mother tells her that enduring everything is necessary if she wants to become the future Grand Duchess. Cornered from all sides, Gerald finally breaks down and tearfully asks how even her own mother could force her into such a situation. Gerald's father confidently assures her that the Indigentia family will soon fall into their hands, and soon they will drive away that disgusting kid Caleb. When Gerald worries that Elia might uncover what she's been doing to Caleb, her father brushes the concern aside. He insists Caleb is already under her influence, while Elia is nothing more than a low-born girl who can be discarded at any time. He then tells Gerald to manipulate Elia the same way she manipulated Caleb. Reassured by his words, Gerald regains her confidence, convinced that controlling Elia will be even easier. Back in the present, Elia tells Gerald that she's genuinely worried about her lack of noble etiquette, which is why she already told everything to Cedric. She once told Cedric that she could never stand beside him because he was a noble while she was only a commoner. She believed their differences would only invite ridicule and keep them apart. In Elia's memory, Cedric gently reassures her that he doesn't care about her status, etiquette, abilities, or what anyone else thinks. He tells her that he loves her as a person, and overwhelmed by his sincerity, Elia tearfully confesses that she loves him too. Although Gerald continues acting kind, she's completely baffled by Elia's reaction. Instead of feeling discouraged by the criticism, Elia remains cheerful. Elia, however, realizes that beneath Gerald's gentle words lies an attempt to manipulate and brainwash her. Pretending not to notice, she plays along while patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. When Elia asks whether the walking lesson is over, Gerald smiles and replies that the real lesson is only beginning. She orders a servant to bring out a pair of high heels, leaving Elia with the uneasy feeling that something is wrong. Gerald has Elia put on the tall heels, claiming that beginners improve through practice. Although Elia suspects Gerald has an ulterior motive, she pretends to cooperate and carefully begins walking. After complimenting her, Gerald suddenly tells Elia to walk faster. Sensing that Gerald may be trying to make her lose her balance, Elia stays cautious and continues forward. Then, without warning, one of the heels suddenly snaps. A loud crash echoes through the room. Calb immediately looks over as Gerald cries out, "Oh my lady Elia!" Elia falls to the ground and immediately wonders if Gerald deliberately damaged the heels. Just as she's about to confront her, Gerald quickly shifts the blame onto a maid. Claiming the accident could have ended in disaster, she promises to punish whoever prepared the defective shoes. Before anyone else can react, Calb rushes to Elia's side and anxiously asks if she's hurt. Elia reassures him that she's fine. Gerald then suggests ending the lesson for the day and with a mocking smile tells Elia to get some rest. Elia is left speechless. This woman is seriously resorting to such childish tricks. Later, the doctor examines Elia and confirms that she has only a few minor scratches. With proper treatment, she'll make a full recovery. Although Elia reassures Calb that she's completely fine, the worry on his face doesn't fade. Overcome with guilt, Calb apologizes for what happened. Elia gently comforts him and encourages him to return to his classes. He reluctantly agrees, but instead of leaving, he quietly waits outside her room, unable to stop worrying about her. Once she's alone, Elia reflects on the incident. Gerald's plan had completely backfired. Instead of driving them apart, it only made Calb care about her even more. Realizing she can no longer ignore the situation, Elia decides to tell Cedric the truth. At the same time, she admits to herself that Gerald is far more cunning and dangerous than she initially believed. The story then shifts to Gerald's past. Despite growing up surrounded by wealth and luxury, she was never satisfied. No matter how much she had, she always craved more. Later, Elia privately summons the etiquette teacher and thanks her for not punishing the maid who had been blamed for the broken heels. Believing Elia had simply forgiven the maid out of kindness, the teacher praises her compassion. But Elia calmly reveals that she already knows the maid was innocent. Looking the teacher straight in the eye, she asks if she truly intends to keep pretending, even when they're alone. The teacher immediately drops her polite facade. She warns Elia not to overestimate her position, insisting that the Marquis of Babylon is the one who truly holds power within the mansion. She accuses Elia of becoming arrogant after gaining Cedric's favor and questions why she's suddenly involving herself in the Grand Duchy's affairs. Elia asks a single question: "Do you feel no guilt for what you've done to Calb?" Without the slightest hesitation, the teacher replies that everything she has done was for the Calb's sake. Convinced that Calb trusts and understands her, she tells Elia to remember her place before demanding to know who she really is. Throughout the confrontation, Elia remains silent, carefully hiding her true thoughts. Thinking about Caleb's lonely childhood, she understands that even after becoming the Grand Duke, he was surrounded by people who only wanted to exploit him. Despite always being surrounded by others, he had been completely alone. A faint smile appears on Elia's face as she reaches a conclusion. The most effective way to deal with people like Gerald is to make them experience the very suffering they forced upon others. With that thought, she quietly calls Gerald over. As Gerald approaches, Elia looks at her with a smug smile and calmly says, "You look so hideous." For a moment, Gerald falls silent as Elia continues smiling calmly, but the silence doesn't last. Gerald suddenly glares at her in fury. Unfazed, Elia turns Gerald's own words against her. With a hint of sarcasm, she questions whether someone who constantly boasts about etiquette should be speaking so rudely. She remarks that a true aristocrat should possess proper manners, leaving Gerald both humiliated and enraged. Unable to contain her anger any longer, Gerald explodes. She shouts that a mere commoner has no right to lecture her and swings her hand at Elia. But before the slap can land, Elia catches her wrist with ease. Gerald is left stunned by Elia's unexpected strength. Elia firmly warns her to stop targeting Calb, declaring that she will continue standing in Gerald's way because Calb doesn't deserve to be manipulated. At that moment, Calb arrives with Cedric and Edwin. The instant Gerald notices them, her attitude changes completely. Tears well up in her eyes as she plays the victim, claiming that Elia suddenly insulted her for no reason. Calb ignores every one of her excuses. Instead, he coldly announces that Gerald is fired effective immediately and orders her to leave. Gerald is left speechless. She refuses to accept the decision, insisting it makes no sense and demanding to know why she is being dismissed. When she asks whether he made the decision on impulse, Calb calmly replies that it wasn't sudden at all. He then reveals the old scars on his hands, the marks left by the beatings he endured under Gerald's care. The scars make it clear that he hasn't forgotten the abuse he suffered and that his decision is the result of years of mistreatment, not a moment of anger. Having said all he needs to, Calb refuses to argue further and simply orders her to leave. Shaken, Gerald struggles to understand what is happening. She convinces herself that Calb has been brainwashed, believing he should still be obedient to her after all the years she spent molding him to obey. Desperate for support, Gerald turns to Cedric. She argues that Calb is still too young to understand the situation and insists that everything she did was simply for his education. Elia immediately tears apart that excuse. She asks whether Gerald's actions were ever fair to begin with, making it clear that abuse can never be justified as education. As the confrontation escalates, Cedric steps forward. He stands in front of Elia, coldly condemns Gerald for abusing his younger brother, and orders her to leave. He also declares that he will personally discuss the matter with Marquis Babylon. Realizing that everything she had worked for has collapsed, Gerald silently vows that she won't give up. Just then, a recording sphere is brought out. It plays Gerald's own words from her private lessons with Calb, exposing everything she had said behind closed doors. Hearing the recording, Gerald's expression turns pale as she realizes there is undeniable evidence against her. Calb then admits that, although he trusted Elia's judgment about Gerald, part of him still wanted to believe Gerald. After hearing her repeatedly claim that everything she did was for his own good, he had gradually accepted the abuse and convinced himself that it was normal. But everything changed when Elia was injured. Unable to ignore it any longer, Calb finally went to Cedric. The moment Cedric sees him, he immediately kneels down and anxiously asks if he's all right. Mistaking Caleb's trembling for cold, he even orders Edwin to bring 10 more blankets. Touched by Cedric's genuine concern, Calb realizes something he had forgotten for a long time. His older brother had always cared about him. Gaining confidence, Calb tells everything to Cedric. Gerald refuses to accept her dismissal, insisting that, as the daughter of Marquis Babylon, no one has the right to treat her this way. She tries to use her family's status to pressure Cedric into taking her side. Cedric doesn't answer immediately. His expression turns icy and the atmosphere grows tense. Sensing his brother's anger, Calb quietly reaches for Cedric's hand and softly calls him Hyung. The simple gesture is enough to calm him. Cedric then acknowledges the Babylon family's prestigious reputation, but declares that a family of such standing should set an example, not abuse its authority. As punishment, he orders the entire incident to be documented and publicly displayed at both the Babylon residence and the Grand Ducal Mansion for 30 days, leaving Gerald speechless. With that, Cedric formally expels Gerald, bringing the confrontation to an end. Left alone, Gerald refuses to accept any responsibility. Rather than admitting her mistakes, she fixates on the humiliation awaiting her and convinces herself that she has done nothing wrong. In her mind, everything is Elia's fault. Meanwhile, Elia is relieved that Gerald is finally gone and believes the ordeal is finally over. Cedric then sincerely thanks Elia, admitting that without her, Calb would have continued suffering in silence and he would never have learned the truth. Embarrassed by the praise, Elia insists she didn't do much and says that Calb and Cedric were the ones who ultimately resolved everything. Cedric, however, refuses to let her downplay her role. He then apologizes for unexpectedly pulling her close earlier. Cedric explains that he wanted everyone to know Elia is someone important to him so that the Babylon family would never dare target her again. He also admits that the situation escalated because he failed to act sooner and promises that, from now on, he will always ask for her consent before touching her. Elia accepts his apology, though she quietly thinks Cedric is surprisingly calculating. Relieved that Calb now trusts her, Elia believes the greatest obstacle standing in the way of his future as the Grand Duke has finally been removed. Hoping her missing memories will eventually return, she decides it's finally time to get some rest. Before leaving, she thanks Cedric. However, he suddenly stops her, gently lifts a strand of her hair and smells it, leaving Elia completely bewildered. Cedric quickly apologizes for the strange behavior and explains that he was simply checking something. He then asks whether she's wearing perfume. Elia replies that she has never used any, and Cedric quietly accepts her answer without offering any further explanation, leaving her even more confused. Just then, Calb walks over and smells her hair as well. Watching him, Elia is reminded of a similar moment from her previous life, when her younger brother used to check her hair for scents. Hoping that life will finally become peaceful, she invites Calb to have dinner with her and he happily agrees. The scene then shifts to a carriage carrying Gerald away from the Grand Ducal Mansion. Still unable to accept what happened, Gerald replays the events in her mind. After recalling Cedric's behavior toward Elia, she convinces herself that the two must be a couple, though she refuses to believe Cedric could genuinely fall in love with a commoner. After Gerald is sent back, Cedric gathers the vassals to decide whether Marquis Reynold Babylon should also be expelled. The council quickly splits into two sides. His supporters defend his past contributions, while his opponents argue that Gerald's actions amount to treason against the Grand Ducal family and demand his removal. Watching the nobles argue, Cedric is disgusted by their hypocrisy and is relieved Calb wasn't brought to witness the meeting. Realizing he cannot eliminate the Babylon family's influence overnight, he decides to weaken their power gradually instead. Meanwhile, at the Babylon estate, the family is relieved to have avoided immediate expulsion, but Reynold refuses to let the matter end there, hinting that he plans to act. Reynold appeals to have Jural's punishment reduced, citing the Babylon family's connection to the Grand Duchess's ancestors. He even offers to accept the 1-week prohibition himself if Jural's sentence is shortened to 15 days. Reynold confidently expects his appeal to be accepted, but it is returned unopened because it bears the Babylon family seal. Moments later, he receives an official message stating that if he reflects on his actions and follows a 1-week abstinence order, his punishment will remain at 30 days instead of becoming harsher. Furious, Reynold tears up the notice, curses the Grand Prince, and vents his anger by smashing objects. Refusing to accept responsibility, he blames the Grand Prince and Elia for his humiliation and vows to make them regret what they have done. Elia notices Calb happily talking with his teachers and is relieved to see how much he has changed. Once withdrawn and emotionless, Calb now smiles naturally and even enjoys interacting with others. Watching him makes Elia realize that both Calb and Cedric have always hidden their feelings behind cold expressions. As she reflects on their relationship, Elia realizes she knows very little about Cedric despite being engaged to marry him. Since Cedric also knows almost nothing about her, she decides they should gradually learn more about each other instead of remaining strangers. The focus then shifts to the wedding preparations. Elia and Cedric spend hours reviewing plans, choosing wedding clothes, and selecting furniture and household items. By the end of the day, Cedric says most of the wedding arrangements are complete and suggests continuing the remaining work the next day. Although relieved, Elia is exhausted from all the shopping and decision-making. Just as they are about to finish, she remembers an imperial wedding tradition. The wedding banquet should include the bride and groom's favorite foods. Smiling, she confidently says that while she doesn't know much about the other wedding customs, she can at least take care of planning the menu herself. While planning their wedding banquet, Elia asks Cedric about his favorite foods. Cedric quietly reveals that the curse has already dulled his senses, causing him to lose his sense of smell and taste. Since he can no longer enjoy food, he tells Elia to choose whatever dishes she likes for the banquet. Shocked, Elia remembers how the original story described the curse. It gradually steals all 5 senses one by one until the victim falls into an eternal sleep, remaining alive but never waking again. Cedric reveals that although his curse has taken away his ability to smell flowers and taste food, there is one exception: he can still clearly smell Elia's scent. To prove it, he points out that he cannot smell the tea in front of him, yet her scent remains unmistakable. The revelation leaves Elia stunned. She concludes that Cedric's ability to sense only her scent must be directly connected to the curse she placed on him. Before they can discuss it further, a sudden thunderstorm erupts, startling them both. Calb excitedly runs in to tell Elia that it's raining and he wants to eat potato pancakes. A few minutes ago, while Elia is busy with the wedding preparations, Calb misses spending time with her. Remembering the meals she once cooked for him, especially her potato pancakes, he suddenly realizes something doesn't add up. Even though Elia claims to have amnesia, she somehow remembered how to make the dish. He wonders if cooking it awakened part of her lost memories and worries that if she fully regains them, she may leave to reunite with her family. The story then returns to the present. Calb happily asks Elia to make potato pancakes, explaining that he rushed over as soon as it started raining because rain reminds Calb of that dish. Calb confidently says that her potato pancakes will bring back Cedric's appetite. As rain pours outside, Cedric unexpectedly asks Calb if he caused the rain, but Calb denies it, so he lets the matter go. Elia prepares crispy potato pancakes for Calb and Cedric. Chef Built watches closely and takes notes because the dish is completely unfamiliar in this world. She explains that this version uses plenty of oil, which makes the edges crispier. Elia finishes the potato pancakes and brings them to the table. Calb happily tries them and praises the food, telling Elia that they are delicious while Elia encourages him to dip the pancakes in the sauce. Cedric, however, is much quieter. As Calb enjoys the food, Elia encourages Cedric to try it as well. Cedric hesitates but eventually tastes the pancake. Elia then notices Cedric's reaction. She realizes Cedric has no sense of taste or smell. She feels guilty because she knows she was responsible for the curse. Determined to make things right, she resolves to regain her memories, lift the curse, and feed Cedric delicious food. After eating Elia's potato pancake, Cedric suddenly struggles, making Elia and Calb fear that something is wrong. The chef even worries that the food might be poisoned, but Calb insists that the food is perfectly fine. When someone calls for a doctor, Cedric stops them and reveals the real reason for his reaction. He can finally taste food again after a long time. Elia is left completely stunned by the unexpected discovery. Calb is shocked to learn that Cedric lost his sense of taste because of the curse. Cedric apologizes for keeping it from him, but Calb assures him that there is nothing to apologize for. He only asks Cedric to tell him if anything happens in the future. Watching the brothers reconcile, Elia feels relieved, but she also begins to wonder whether her cooking somehow weakens Cedric's curse after he admits that he could taste her food. Realizing that this discovery could change the course of the story, Elia decides to be careful from now on. Her homemade potato pancakes quickly become a huge success, with both Cedric and Calb asking for more. The meal brings the family together, creating a warm and cheerful atmosphere. Afterward, Elia returns to her room exhausted but satisfied and takes a relaxing bath. While helping her, Olivia sincerely thanks Elia. She explains that before Elia arrived, the Grand Ducal residence had been cold and quiet, with hardly any laughter or conversation. Now the mansion feels completely different. Even Cedric and Calb, who rarely interacted before, have started talking and smiling together. Olivia's words leave Elia feeling guilty. She believes her marriage to Cedric is only a contract and blames herself for his curse. Remembering Cedric's lost sense of taste, Elia decides that she will cook all of his favorite foods. Meanwhile, Cedric stands alone by a rain-soaked window, deep in thought. He realizes that the rain was created by Caleb's weather magic, a legendary power that had been lost for more than a century because no one had possessed the talent or ability to master it. Cedric remembers trying to teach Calb this magic in the past, but Calb had repeatedly doubted himself, believing he lacked the talent, and eventually gave up. Now, Cedric realizes that Calb had unknowingly awakened this long-lost power. As he reflects on everything that has happened recently, Cedric notices a strange pattern. Ever since Elia entered their lives, impossible things have continued to occur. Calb awakened the legendary weather magic, Elia can remember recipes despite claiming to have lost her memories, and Cedric, despite his curse, can still smell Elia's scent. Unable to find any information about Elia or her family, Cedric becomes increasingly convinced that she is surrounded by mysteries. Staring silently at the rain, he wonders, who on earth is she?